Yeah. Okay, we're back on? Yeah, that was a good comment. Yeah, it's surprising he didn't know who the high priest was. Yeah, I think they changed high priests fairly recently as a part of it. And he's been away for several years. And so would be unaware of it, or at least or maybe he was lying. Did Paul do that? Well, I don't know. But as I was saying, Paul doesn't just run off and get himself martyred. It's not the spiritual giant thing to do. Now, if we have to die for Jesus, we're supposed to die willingly. But we're not called upon to be suicidal and to set up a situation that gets ourselves killed. So here, Paul learns that there's going to be an assassination attempt on him. And he doesn't say, oh boy, tomorrow I get to die for Jesus. Now, when it's time to die, he's going to be ready to die. When he writes to Timothy, he says, I'm ready to go. In 2 Timothy. I've fought the fight. I've run the race. There's a reward waiting for me. When he's writing to the Philippians, he says, whether to live or, to live is Christ, but to die is gain. He's not afraid of death and all that kind of stuff, but he's also not eager to die if God has more for him to do. So he reports the assassination plan, the plot. And of course, the Roman centurion foils the plan by loading him up in the middle of the night with a small army and takes him down to Caesarea. See, again, now the Roman centurion's doing the thing. If this is a Roman citizen, I have protected my Roman citizen. And it's a large enough force, they could handle 40 assassins who are dedicated to kill him. I mean, they really sense the need to do that. I just wonder how long those guys went hungry after that. But before they gave up. But they come after him, and he goes to Felix the governor. And I love Claudius's letter where he comes out the hero rescuing this poor abused Roman citizen. But he gets there, and Paul goes on trial before Felix, and he's falsely accused. But again, what does Paul do? He goes to the gospel. He goes to the gospel. And he ends up in jail for years. For a couple of years now. And after 2 years, a guy named Festus comes in and replaces Felix. Now, what these governors were is you had to be a certain level of citizen in the Roman system. And you're a part of the aristocracy. And a part of your climbing up to eventually be a member of the Senate is to get these kinds of jobs. And so this is someone who they were often, in a lot of areas, they were only appointed for 1 year at a time. They'd go in, they hired their own staff, and they would go in and run a country for a year. But what they did was the way you made your money was you took bribes, and one of their jobs was to operate the tax systems, and so they would get a little under the table pay, and as long as you didn't get caught, you could get as rich as you wanted. And so the idea was usually these guys would go in and they'd come out with about 3 times as much money as they went in. Now, if you got caught, if it was so bad that the local aristocracy went and complained and you were found guilty, you could even be executed. I mean, it was a serious crime. But the thing is no one ever accuses someone at that level of society unless you can take them out. So most people just endured the corruption. So these guys are thoroughly corrupt. Pontius Pilate was the same thing. They're just making whatever they can, hand over fist. And when they're done with these governor jobs, they're rich men. They're rich men. Yeah. And but the thing is, they didn't have book contracts back then. And speaking engagements. But it's very corrupt. Very corrupt. I guess that's where we can appreciate the comment by Arnold Schwarzenegger. He says, I can't be bought. I got $800 million. I don't need any more money. So, he says, I got all the money I need. Special interest can't buy me. And in fact, I think he threatened to just pay for his own campaign from his own pocket money. Yeah, probably did. But but it's very corrupt. Now, Festus comes along, And when he's there, these high priests, they go after Paul again. They figure, we got a young guy on the block. He doesn't know anything now. We got to, before he figures things out, let's get our chance. As a governor, Festus could do certain rulings against Paul. And if he had, for example, if Paul had been accused of treason, even Festus could execute him. But when Festus learns it's over a religious debate, it's outside of his legal jurisdiction in terms of anything of significance. And by the time Paul appeals to Caesar, he realizes, Festus has already figured that out. They're arguing about religious stuff. And again, the Roman policy was, let them do their own thing. And so, but what is God doing through this? Well, God's plan is what? To get Paul to Rome. But there was something that Jesus had said to Paul. And that was that Jesus had called Paul to witness both to his countrymen and to governors and to kings. And this is being fulfilled. And so he witnesses it to him. And again, Paul goes for his salvation. He uses the opportunity to share the gospel. King Agrippa comes. King Agrippa comes at the end of chapter 25 and 26. And again, Paul shares the gospel and apparently comes close to converting him. Because King Agrippa, he's Herod Agrippa, he's the grandson or great-grandson of Herod the Great. And he's a Roman petty king now over Galilee and some areas. And so he listens to Paul, and he's aware of Jewish culture. Now, he's completely Hellenized. He's completely Greek. And he builds Greek temples along with Jewish synagogues. I mean, he's just whatever makes anybody happy kind of a thing. The perfect Roman puppet. But yet, when Paul witnesses to him, he comes close because he does understand. He understands the significance of what Paul is saying. I would suspect that he didn't get saved. And yet again, Paul does not back down from sharing the gospel. And another important thing. Paul doesn't gripe and complain and get depressed. Now, one of the nice things is he's put under house arrest and he has contact with people and he's able to continue to have some kind of ministry. But let's ask this question. What is the significance of this? He's knocked out a commission for at least 2 years, and then he's going to have his journey that's going to take at least another year. So he's off the scene more or less for 3 years or more. But what does that do in terms of Paul's status? One of the things that stands out is by the time Paul gets to Rome, he is recognized, if you want to call it, as a hero of the church. His apostleship's no longer doubted or questioned. The problem he had with the Corinthian elders is all the way in the past now. He is clearly as much an apostle as Peter. There's no doubt about that in the church. Now, we have his voyage in chapters 27 and 28. And again, it's a fun story. Nobody listens to him, so they get themselves in trouble. And yet, he prays and asks, and God grants him the lives of everybody, including the prisoners. But notice again, he knows that God has promised to deliver them, and yet when the crew tries to sneak off the boat, he warns the centurion, you better not let them get away, because if you let them get away, we'll drown. Well, just a minute. You say, didn't God just promise the lives of all the people? So you ought to just sit back and say, hey, it's okay if they leave. We're still going to make it. No, even when we know what God's will is, He's called us to a ministry, He's called us to do something, we still have responsibilities to act rationally, reasonably in achieving that goal. It's just like, if I know God is going to bring someone to salvation, I still need to share the gospel with them. You don't just sit back and say, well, God's going to save them. Don't need to say anything. No, that's not the way God works. And here, God knows Paul knows God is going to deliver the people, but there are certain things that have to happen, and there are human agents that have to be involved in accomplishing God's will. So he stops these guys from bailing out because they're a part of God's plan. And indeed, they all get to the island, and they're safely there. Those who can swim, swim. Those who can't, use boards and dog paddle over. The ship is destroyed, just like Paul said. And then we have this interesting thing on Malta. The people on Malta build them a fire and bring them in, and Paul gets bit by a snake. Now, what do we know about this asp? It's deadly poisonous. And apparently a person who got bit by it swelled up and died fairly fast. Probably not quite as bad as there was a snake in the Vietnam War that the Viet Cong used in their tunnel system. They would tie it on a string and have it hanging in the tunnel. And you couldn't see it. And it was a 2-second death. From the time it bit you till you were dead. Boom, gone, yeah. Just powerful poison. I mean, you didn't have time to give yourself an antidote. You were gone if you got bit. And this isn't quite as bad. I think it probably took 15, 30 minutes. But he gets bit. He just shakes the thing off into the fire and just goes on. Now, this is in fulfillment of Mark. That's right. That's right. That's right. You won't be harmed. Mark chapter 15 or 16. 16. Mark 16 is fulfilled right here. And so our snake handlers in Tennessee and Kentucky, they got the wrong idea, which is why they keep having funerals. It's not a command to handle snakes and tempt the Lord. See? But here's a situation where he is serving the Lord, and this happens, and God delivers him and protects him in fulfillment of Jesus' promise. But what does it do with the people? What's their initial response? First they think, well, he's obviously a murderer. That's why the snake bit him. Their own. Then when he doesn't die, then what do they conclude? He must be a god. Let's go to the other extreme. He's not, but what does he do with this opportunity? He brings them to God. And an interesting thing, he heals everyone they bring. He he exercises his gift of healing or his apostolic authority. Heals at will, and it brings everybody. And on this small island, another church is planted by Paul the prisoner. God's purpose, God's divine appointment. And that's the exciting thing. Now, the journey continues, and they leave Malta, and they arrive in Rome. And we have Paul's ministry in Rome. He gathers with the Jews, and they don't know anything about him. Okay, that's good news. What does that mean? Yeah, well, no, it's just that he's got access to the Jewish community. They haven't been warned, so they don't know anything's wrong with him. So all the leaders come to hear him. He gets, again, what? The Jew first. He's harvesting the Jews. Now, there's already Christians in Rome. He's already written the book of Romans. So there is a church in Rome, but there's still the Jewish community that he's reaching out to. And he shares the gospel with them. We have the circumstance that God has set the situation up too, in that he's under house arrest, but he can have visitors. And we know, though, that he's got 1 or 2 Roman guards chained to him at all times. They didn't have the ankle... Well, that is their ankle bracelet thing. We now have the little ankle thing that keeps you in your house. Well, that was their version of it. Now, we learn from Philippians that the end result is because he's been brought as a prisoner to be tried by Caesar, he's guarded by Caesar's troops, the Praetorian Guard. In Philippians, we learn that the end result is a bunch of the Praetorian Guard became Christians. So, see, Paul, even in his circumstances, is just evangelizing away. Every circumstance advances the gospel. And now, Paul, the apostle, has brought the gospel to Rome, the center of the known world. And, of course, his goal is to go on even beyond that. In Romans, he said he wanted to go on to Spain. He wanted to visit the church at Rome. Well, he got there on a paid way there, I guess you'd say. Now, Acts ends with the statement that he's there, no one's hindering him, and he's preaching the gospel away. And we're told, in fact, that he was there for 2 whole years. Now, what we know historically is this: the rule with this is when you were arrested and sent to Caesar like this, Caesar could choose to try you or not. He might just simply not try you at all. And in fact, most cases he didn't, because he didn't want to waste his time. But also, your accusers had to be there. And they had 2 years to get therein. Okay, that was due process. And after 2 years, if they haven't shown up, due process said you get released. So apparently, they just simply let him go on his way. And they figured, we got him out of our hair for a couple of years. And no one ever came to accuse him, apparently. Because when we get to Philippians, he's anticipating being released. So that would indicate that nothing happened.
Does that also send I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No.
Doesn't that also send a message, though, that his accusers really didn't think they had a leg?
That's right. His accusers knew Caesar wasn't going to be interested in what they had to complain about. Yeah. They knew they didn't have a leg to stand on, and they wouldn't be able to prove anything. They knew it was a waste. So they were just basically satisfied to get him out of town.
Did they have anything to risk by accusing him and then having him be acquitted?
Probably not, but it could, in the sense that if Caesar then said, maybe I don't want these guys in charge of that country. But it's more likely they knew that even if they got there, Caesar would say, I don't want to hear some religious debate. Throw them out. And it was more like that. Now, later on, when Paul gets arrested the second time, he's arrested because Nero wants him dead. And so he was, it's one of those things, give him a fair trial and hang him. It was a rigged deal from the beginning. Paul was doomed. And in that case, because he was already doomed and it was a very negative situation, that's why he got put into a dungeon. The fact that he gets his own house here indicates that probably when he got there, the centurion who was involved told the people in charge, said, this guy's a political prisoner. They don't have a leg to stand on. He's been mistreated. The governor's own letter says, I can't figure out what's wrong with this guy, but he appealed to Caesar, so here, Caesar, you figure it out. He's being accused of some religious debates. And so they probably sat there and said, the guy is going to be released, so let's just let him get a house and stay out of our hair.
Why the 2 years?
Well, again, it's the 2-year wait, waiting for your accusers to show up. But also, some indications is often it took that long just to come to trial because it was so backed up. If those who were going to be eventually, what the Caesars did is they got tired of it and they appointed judges. So then they would only try the most notorious cases or something like that, and so they were able to work it out or more efficiently that way. Any questions on the book of Acts? Some things that we've covered or not covered.
So, just to clarify, there's probably 2 separate imprisonments. The one that Acts refers to, and of course, the first one, the
right.
House prison, more friendlier one.
Right.
But probably the prison epistles
were written from this one. Yeah. Yeah. Well, now the prison epistles are Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. Okay, those were the 4 written from this imprisonment. During these 2 years, those 4 are written. Now, 2 Timothy is his second imprisonment. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, this is where he's in a dungeon. And in fact, they're pretty sure of the dungeon area where he was. And it was a dungeon where they dropped you down into a hole, small time room, and it had a door, and when you walked through the door, you walked to your death.
It seems like Luke was there.
Yeah.
So Luke obviously finished his book, felt compelled to give it to Theophilus.
Right.
And then he went on and followed John.
Continued to follow Paul for the rest of his.
After Paul got released, do you think it's likely that he went to Spain?
Yes. Tradition says he did make it to Spain. That he had another missionary journey after he was released. He went all the way to Spain, and then when he came back, this was after Nero's persecution began, and he was captured in, I think, in Troas or somewhere like that, or Miletus, where he left Trophimus sick there, but he was captured and then brought to Rome. Peter was also captured and brought to Rome, or went to Rome and was captured. I think he was captured and brought to Rome. And so then Nero was killing him off in a serious persecution.
Peter was killed before Paul, right?
About the same time. I don't know which one was.
So we don't know historically if Paul was aware of Peter's death.
Right.
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
They both confessed in the last epistles that
They're going to their deaths. Yeah.
Going to their deaths. So it must have been evident that this was a empirical arrest.
That's right.
I'm going to die.
Yeah.
Get to that door and die.
Yeah. And in fact, Peter's probably wrote 2 Peter after being captured.
So why does church history tell us why Peter would go to Rome? So he focused more on the Jews?
I think he went to Rome to be martyred. He knew that that's where he was supposed to die. And
21 on how he died. He like the Spirit compelled him to go there.
something like that, yeah. I can't remember exactly if he was captured. I don't think he was actually captured in Rome. I think he was taken to Rome. He was captured somewhere else. Now the Catholic Church says he went to Rome, but I think church history says, church tradition says he was captured and brought to Rome. But when he was captured, he knew he was going to die in Rome, and of course he requested to be crucified upside down. And he would be crucified because he's a non-Roman citizen. Paul would be beheaded because he was a Roman citizen. He requested to be crucified upside down because he felt like he didn't deserve to die as comfortable a death as Jesus. So he figured that would be more miserable. And so he chose that route. That's right. Yeah.
So in the second imprisonment, obviously, it was much more harsher for Paul.
Right.
Dungeon, probably, for tradition writing, really, even in the dungeon, when you don't have any lights, you really age.
That's right. Cold. Yeah, cold, damp, rat infested. I think ever so often they would let down a bucket, and that was your toilet. And every so often they'd pull it up and replace it or whatever. Just filthy. Minimum of food. In fact, I think your friends had to bring you food in that situation.
Would Luke have had access?
Yeah, Luke would. Yeah, people would still have access to him through the hole in the ground. So Timothy probably, he asked Timothy to come and bring stuff. Timothy would actually have access, and apparently, according to church tradition, Timothy got arrested, but then released. And Hebrews refers to Timothy's release. Hebrews being written about the time of Paul's martyrdom. But again, Paul here, Luke ends it with in a fairly positive note. It's interesting that he ends it with him still in prison. That would indicate that's probably when he's writing it. Although he says he was there about 2 years, and apparently very soon after that he was released. But again, for Luke's purposes, he has shown that the next generation from Jesus carried the gospel to everywhere in the world. That's right. That's right. You can't stop it. It just keeps spreading. That's right. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that God in His sovereignty allowed Paul enough time in that 2-year imprisonment to complete those prison epistles.
That's right.
At the same time, Luke was also right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you really, you have a lot of Scripture being produced at a time that would be perceived humanly as tumultuous time, when in fact God literally took that time and set that aside.
Yeah, that's right.
In pretty good circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, God. In fact, God provided him an ideal situation. And some people say, you had to have that for Paul to slow down long enough to sit down and write this stuff. But he wrote Romans and Corinthians when he was busy on his missionary journey. So, I mean, he could do it if he wanted to. But some significant letters. Ephesians, Colossians, deep theology, practical application. Philippians, very practical. Those things. Any other questions? Not. We're done about 15 minutes early tonight. And have a good Christmas break. Oh, that's right. Thanksgiving break. Yeah, we'll see you in December after Thanksgiving. I guess we'll see you probably November the 30th at the open house. And yes. Yeah, if something happens, there was some question that this room might not be available. I don't know. It is though, right? Yeah. I haven't heard anything either. So, yeah, it's on the calendar. So, yeah, same night, same place. And we're very appreciative of the church for letting us use it. This is great. Yeah.